Right. Good evening. I'm Andrew Crabtree. I'm the Director of Community Development here in the city of Santa Clara. And I want to say thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. I know it's a beautiful night, and I really appreciate you all being here for our event. This is part of our series on placemaking. And tonight, our panel is going to focus particularly on housing, building new neighborhoods, and how that's a part of our overall placemaking goals, or how it can be a part of that. Now, I like to refer to you as our studio audience. Tonight's event is being live streamed on both Facebook and YouTube, and it will be recorded there in the future. I know that when I go home tonight, there'll probably be about 200 views or so on those pages. So other folks have told me that they would be here tonight, but we weren't serving wine or beer, so they felt like it was better watched at home. So I will introduce our panel. They're going to, three of our panelists are each going to give a short presentation. We'll have some Q&A up here, and then we'll open up for the audience to participate as well. I'll start from the left there, your right. Jeff Smith is our moderator. He's Senior Vice President for Residential Development at Ceres Regis. He has over 20 years of real estate development and construction experience in Northern California, and more than 16 years with Ceres Regis, where he's managed all phases of residential development, including acquisition, due diligence, entitlement, financing, design, construction, marketing, sell out, and lease up. And he has a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Colorado Boulder, as both a licensed real estate broker and contractor in the state of California. He is also a member of the Urban Land Institute. To his right is John O'Brien, who is the Senior Director of Real Estate and Site Services for NVIDIA Corporation, based here in Santa Clara. As Senior Director of Real Estate and Site Services, John oversees all operational management, facilities maintenance, food service, employee amenities, and portfolio management for 1.5 million square feet in Santa Clara. He is also the pilot in command of the development of NVIDIA's new campus, the first phase of which is over 500,000 square feet. He has a 20-year tenure in industrial real estate business, conducted acquisition due diligence for more than 1 million square feet of multi-tenant industrial property. He's personally managed over 600,000 square feet of industrial office and retail space, and has been responsible for the development of more than 1.5 million square feet of industrial and R&D product. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of California, Irvine, and has a Master of Arts degree in Business from Webster University in St. Louis. He's also retired from the U.S. Marine Corps, where he was a lieutenant colonel. To his right is Professor C.J. Gabe. He's an urban planning assistant professor at Santa Clara University's Department of Environmental Studies and Sciences. And his research focuses on land use planning and regulation, climate change mitigation, and housing affordability. CJ has a PhD in urban planning from UCLA, a Master of Urban Planning degree from the University of Washington, and a bachelor's degree in planning, public policy, and management from the University of Oregon. He has more than 10 years of experience in professional planning practice and has been a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners since 2008. And then finally, we have Rob Steinberg, chairman of Steinberg Architects. With over 40 years of experience, Rob is internationally recognized as an expert and design practice innovator in urban planning and residential architecture. He is a frequent lecturer, facilitator, and presenter at development planning and multifamily design conferences across the country. Topics have included future trends in multifamily development, effective solutions to infill development, revitalization of urban cores, and impacts of good design. He is a fellow in the American Institute of Architects, has authored chapters on urban land use for international publications, has lectured at the University of California, Berkeley, Stanford University, and San Jose State University on housing-related issues. He's the executive board member of SPUR, a San Francisco Bay Area planning and urban research think tank. And he is a governor with the Urban Land Institute and an active member of the Fisher Center for Urban Policy at the University of California. So as you can see, we have a very qualified, illustrious panel here tonight, so it should be a really good conversation. I'm looking forward to it, and I really want to upfront express my appreciation that you're all here. And
nice to see a crowd here and probably in our YouTube audience, and wanted to recognize the City of Santa Clara for really putting this together. New neighborhood development around sustainability. You can even see a bunch of, I'll use a mic that's actually on here. It's great to see a bunch of Santa Clara University students here too, so thanks for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about an issue that's one of the ones that affects us all. How many of you live in Santa Clara right now? Just quick show of hands. A lot of you, most of you. How many of you are concerned in some way about housing affordability for yourselves or someone you care about in the future? I think probably a lot of us here. Today's topic is really thinking over the short run and the long term about how we can meet the housing needs of our future selves and future Santa Clarans, and how we can do it in a way that supports our sustainability goals, our ideals to really create a community that everyone wants to live in. So, the big picture idea here is that the region is growing. We have a housing affordability crisis right now. Nearly 50% of Bay Area renters are living in housing that's unaffordable to them. Something about like a quarter of Bay Area renters are severely cost burdened. With median home prices as they are, first-time home buying seems more and more out of reach. But over the long term, we have an opportunity to leverage our economic growth and our population growth into the kind of neighborhoods which I think many of us, see in our plans and see in our ambitions for the future. So that's what I'm going to be talking about a bit today. So when I think of sustainable placemaking, I was trying to think about what that means for the long term in Santa Clara. And it's really leveraging the regional trends in a way that we can build more housing, well-designed housing that people are excited about living in. And we focus particularly in areas where we have transit infrastructure today and transit infrastructure on the way. So thinking about our bus rapid transit and rail transit infrastructure. And I think the places where people want to live and really at the heart of sustainable placemaking is the idea of accessibility. Somewhere where you can walk and bike, you can ride transit, and you can drive. But we're planning for all of those modes, not just not just one, not just thinking about the car first. And I think it really comes down in terms of accessibility to the idea that we want to help connect people to the places that they want to get to and want to be. And closely tied to this is the idea of amenities. So I've been in Santa Clara for less than a year now, and I've really observed a hunger for walkable places. When you get to a place where you have retail destinations, you have public spaces, you have people out and about, there's a huge hunger for that type of environment here in Santa Clara County and in the Bay Area. And so you see places like downtown Mountain View, Santana Row, downtown San Jose. You see a lot of places where people really love and crave being around other people. So the amenities, the urban amenities, are really a crucial element of that. The public realm, the sidewalks, the street trees, and the destinations that people want to get to. So, a lot of times when we're talking about sustainable neighborhoods, I'm always thinking about housing first, but really it's a lot of the supplemental features that make neighborhoods that we want to live in. And whether you're interested in active recreation, like playing sports, or you're interested in passive recreation, like enjoying nature, we have some incredible natural amenities here in the Bay Area, from the Santa Cruz Mountains to local parks like Central Park. We've got bike paths. I think the neighborhoods that we would consider sustainable placemaking are places where we have open space and green space that we can access really easily. A mix of housing types is really a central fundamental piece of the equation. In the US, we've been really tipping the scale towards single family housing for a long time. We have a lot of demand because of demographics and economic conditions for everything from townhomes, single family apartments, condos. We've got the whole gamut. And so thinking about how we tie this all together in a way that that brings people to Santa Clara and meets both our needs today and our needs in the future. And I wanted to highlight one specific type of housing, accessory dwelling units, that are it's kind of what we think of as planners as invisible density. It's basically, a granny flat in your backyard, or a mother-in-law unit in your, attached to your house. And the idea is, as we're aging, as people go through different life phases, maybe you have a college student at home, maybe you have an aging parent, you have an opportunity to have flexibility in your housing. So it's really adapting the single family neighborhood to the future conditions. So, there are some cities that really proactively and affirmatively promote ADUs. They create handbooks, they sometimes waive fees, they make it as easy as possible. And I think those cities have seen huge success, and they've seen accessory dwelling units be a really popular new part of their housing stock. And so these cities range from Santa Cruz to Seattle and Vancouver, BC, and Portland. Those are some models I think that really Santa Clara could get a lot out of. But broadly, it's this kind of idea of the missing middle. So, I think we've got single family housing on one end of the spectrum, and we've got mid-rise apartments on the other end of the spectrum. But what we lack are a lot of things in the middle, things like 2 units attached, duplexes, or townhomes, or small garden courtyard apartment buildings. In my year here, I've been really lucky to live in a part of Santa Clara where, we have a mix of apartments, old single family housing. We've got kind of it all, townhouses, and within walking distance of downtown Santa Clara. So this missing middle, I think, is a huge market opportunity for a lot of future Bay Area residents and current residents like myself. So you're probably thinking, what are some of the steps that we can be taking today to be moving towards these kind of sustainable neighborhoods? And I think a huge piece of it is thinking through implementation. From my own professional experience and my research, particularly on planning in Southern California, I've found that a few pieces of the recipe are pretty important. One is taking a step back and working through a lot of the big concepts at the planning phase, whether it's through general plan updates or whether it's through specific plans, but really not making all of the decisions on a kind of one-off project by project basis. It's really stepping back and working through what is the vision, what are some of the implementation steps, what are the regulations that are going to be making Santa Clara's desired vision possible. How do we get that figured out early on in the process? And I think the area where so much of the Western US and, probably most places get hung up is on the debate about whether to change or how to change. And I think we really need to frame it around, change is happening. How can we leverage this in a way that we can use it to our advantage and we can use it to make the kind of place we want it to be. So I think it's pretty hard to turn back the tides of time, but what we can do through some really good planning and regulations to implement those plans, take control of larger macro dynamics. And then sometimes cities will kind of struggle with whether to apply certain things on a case-by-case basis or adopt policies like, for instance, changes to parking requirements or, making it more flexibility for accessory dwelling units. Should we do it on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis? Should we do it as we update plan by plan? Seems like in a lot of these situations, some citywide, more broad policy changes work better because you avoid that kind of neighborhood-by-neighborhood tailoring of regulations. And you create something that hopefully will work for most of the city. Maybe you figure out some tweaks, but cities that kind of do some kind of comprehensive changes, they tend to have a little bit better results there. So, in short, it's possible. There are some great case studies around California and including in this community, of cities that have enabled more housing to be built and particularly focused on how do you design it in a way that meets community goals, and how do you build it in the places where people want to live? So near transit, walkable neighborhoods, how can we kind of kill a bunch of birds with one stone in terms of meeting our affordability goals and our placemaking goals and our environmental goals? So that's kind of my take in a nutshell.
Okay. So the first question you're asking yourself is the one I asked myself is, why am I here? Because I'm not a residential guy. I am a corporate guy. But NVIDIA, those who don't know, we're residents of Santa Clara. We've been here for almost 25 years, and we are building this in your city. This is our new home. We're investing a lot of money because we want to be here, and we're going to be here for the rest of our lives. And so one of the things that we struggle with as a company, one of the companies in the Valley, is new workers, hiring and retaining good talent in the Valley. And being a resident of Santa Clara, this is where we live and where we started and where we're going to continue to live for the balance of our days, is how do we attract talent and how do we keep them close by? One of the things like every company here struggles with is, for the 25 years we've been here, obviously the traffic patterns have changed. Our our workforce has changed. The younger workforce we have today isn't the same as the workforce we hired 25 years ago, and we actually have a number of 25-year employees. But the workforce today doesn't want right now to live in a single-family residence primarily. They want to live in a more urban environment. They want to have the amenities close by. They don't want to own a car. They don't want to spend an hour or two on the road. They want to have a better work-life balance. And we struggle with that because right now that isn't necessarily close by. And so what we have to do as a company is we try to figure out how do we help alleviate the traffic problems? How do we alleviate the commute issues that these individuals have and satisfy the housing that they're looking for? And what they typically go to now is they want to live in the city, or they want to live in downtown San Jose, or they want to go to where the urban centers are. And so what we'd love to try to do is figure out how do we help encourage the local communities, like CJ was saying, is find and create these places that provides the things that the workforce today wants, that are centered around transportation. This is our heat map of our employees around us, and we are. Let me see if I can. Is there a pointer on this thing? Which one is it? I'm gonna probably screw this up. Oops, I took me out of. No. Okay, so well, the star in the middle is that's where we're located, and the red density is where most of our population. And again, this is an older population that has gone out to where the single-family residences are. Now, the population that we're fighting is they're moving to the dense centers, which is San Francisco or San Jose. So what we've had to do is start to figure out now on our transportation demand management is shuttles and buses, and those, they help, but they aren't creating a work-life balance, that we still fight with the work-life balance issue with our employees. So again, to echo on what CJ was saying, is you have to focus on the transportation infrastructure that's in place. The rail and the bus, both light and Caltrain rail, is what we start to focus on. So we're leveraging those. This is a map of what we do. We provide shuttle services not only to urban centers, but to leverage the infrastructure that's in place, because this is where our workforce is wanting to go. And we would love it, they would love it, if there was this environment close by. And we work with them every day trying to say, if we could encourage developers like Jeff and Rob to create these places that are more local, and we can help in that regard. It would help from us from a company that is invested here to be able to encourage our workers to be here more, to invest more in the community, to live more and be invested in the community, because this is where they spend the lion's share of their day. I mean, we all spend an awful lot of hours here, and then to burn another couple hours each way in the morning or night to go somewhere else is really counterproductive. So again, as an employer, we really want to encourage to get people off the road. Create a better work-life balance so they can spend more time away from the office. I mean, we love them to be at the office, of course, but someone that's spending too much time away from their family, or away from the time off, becomes unhappy and unproductive eventually. So we are very concerned about that. Yeah. So again, we are a little bit older demographic, so we have an older demographic. So the older, they tend to own. The younger population right now tend to want to rent. So that tends to be the trend. Now, is it because the pricing is so out of reach? But we also pay pretty well, so I don't know the motivations, but the younger generation tends to be a little bit more wanting to lease. They don't want to own a car. They want to be a little bit more kind of transient in that regard. But again, I think, and that changes. As they age, they get married, then their priorities change. But again, for the workforce that we're trying to work on today, the newer worker definitely wants to live in a place of community. They want to go with a place of amenities. They want the place that has a transportation. They're looking for that all in one location. They want it at the office, and they want it at home. So that's kind of our input as an employer is that we would love it to be something much more connected to where they work, and not so much of time wasted in the travel back and forth. Because that's one of the largest complaints we get from our population is, how do we help alleviate their commute? And it's a hard question for us to answer, because we've lived here for 25 years. They chose to live somewhere they want, and how do we help connect them? And the traffic patterns are only getting worse. Yep. most of our population, they aren't looking to live in Tracy, they're looking to live in the city. And so for us to move to the city doesn't make a lot of sense. So here's why. We started here. This is our home. Our founders are very connected to the city of Santa Clara. We had looked, before we purchased the land to build this, our new campus, they looked far and wide at where's the best place, where should we be? And the stories, we actually signed a lease on a large high-rise in downtown San Jose many years ago. And right before he executed the lease, he just woke up and said, this is where the company started, was in Santa Clara. I want to remain in Santa Clara. And then made a very large financial commitment to stay here. This is where the company is. This is where he's very committed to, the company's committed to stay here. And so for us to pick up this company and move it somewhere else, it's not the people in Tracy. It's not San Francisco. This is where the talent is. This is where we compete for the talent, and this is where the company has always been. And we've been very successful here. So to pick up and move doesn't make sense. Now we've opened a satellite office in Oakland to see if we can help alleviate some, but we work as a team. I mean, the company operates very connected and collaboratively, so they have to be together. So those disconnected offices don't necessarily work very well for us. Yeah.
I know this idea is very popular with a lot of people, but it's so obvious it has to be thought about at your level and other large corporations in the exact same situation.
So sorry.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting questions. And
we have to have the mic
Yeah.
for the audience too, because otherwise
the streaming,
no one can hear you. So let's let Rob give his presentation,
and then I'll
we'll
answer
do
your
Q&A, and then we'll have plenty of time
All right.
for audience.
Yeah,
So,
I didn't.
so let's jump in. Sorry.
So obviously, I'm the bad guy here, but I'll face it all. I'm ready for it. Okay, so that's kind of my take on the residential side. I mean, we really do want to have the places that is convenient, that support the community. I mean, we're residents here. I mean, we are a part of the community, and we don't want people just to come in here and work and then disappear and create the traffic and the problems. We want to be connected. We are as a company, and we've invested a lot to be here. And we want to also make the place appropriate for our employees. We don't want them to spend hours and hours commuting. And so by creating the living environment that they're seeking would alleviate that and assist in that process. So that's kind of the message that we have as we're here as my point on this panel. So.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Steinberg, and I like following John. That's not quite the beginning. Yeah, if you'll go all the way back. So if people from the community started their businesses here, they want to stay here, let's make some great places. Let's make some great places in Santa Clara. When we have talked to other groups about placemaking, we found that it's very valuable to develop a common vocabulary that we share together. We can talk about different concepts. So I'd like to take you on a very quick virtual tour of a couple of facilities, 2 that are single buildings and 2 that are collections of buildings. Prior to becoming an architect, I was a filmmaker, and when people ask me what I do, I say that we are involved in choreographing how people move through space, how that makes them feel, and what environments can impact people. And if you asked what our firm does in 4 plus or minus words, I would say that we sculpt space and shape life. And that's what our interest is. Our most successful projects that we've done over the years have some common characteristics that keep repeating from project to project. And I'd like to just share those with you briefly, and then I'll show you how we've applied those in different ways. So we found that our most successful projects are authentic. By that I mean that they are honest about where they are in the time that they were built, that they reach out and they connect with the different edges, the adjacencies of the place that they're built in. that they are pedestrian oriented and focused, that they are welcoming. They're not enclaves unto themselves, but they're adding to the public good, and they're helping, and they're adding to the communities that they're in. We are great believers in environments being designed to foster connection between people. To me, that's what makes a great place. And in order to do that, everybody doesn't relate to one another in the same kind of space. So if there can be a hierarchy, a variety of spaces where different people feel comfortable in different environments, that's very positive. And if you do all that and put it together, you can make very beautiful, memorable places. So I'm going to show you a few projects. This is not about the design of them. Some of the styles may be your taste or may not be your taste, but it's these concepts that I would like to talk about with you. So the first one is a housing project, a mixed-use housing project in an arts district in San Jose. And if you look at the green site, you can see on the upper right, it faces towards the arts district. The bottom right is actually a gateway corner. It's the first building you see when you enter San Jose from the south under 280. There's part of the site that's parallel to the freeway. The left part of the site has a historic, low-rise, single-family neighborhood adjacent to it. And if that wasn't complicated enough, all of the airplanes that come into San Jose go right over the street, Almaden, to the left of the site. So what we did is we designed each of these corners, each of these edges, to specifically relate to the context. So there's an urban corner that faces back towards the emerging downtown. There's a little bit more residential character on the gateway corner. On the upper left is a little stronger, bolder statement to hold its own against the freeway. And on the bottom left, you can see that the building begins to terrace down in height towards the residential neighborhood. And what we did is we also worked with an artist, and we developed an LED light cloud that we put on the roof of the building so that all of the cars on the freeway, all of the planes coming into the city of San Jose see this as a signal and a contribution to the arts district. A second example that I'd like to talk about really focuses a little bit more on the pedestrian experience and the idea of aggregating resources, aggregating open space, aggregating resources. So the site that you see under just starting construction used to be a surface parking lot near the San Pedro Market and the San Pedro restaurants in San Jose. On the right was the backside of restaurants, the service side of restaurants that all faced in the other direction towards the street. And in this area, there are very big blocks that you can see. So it was typical to have paseos or mid-block walkways that went through the block. And if you look on the upper right, you can see the scale of the spaghetti factory, the existing retail, and we made a lot of effort to continue that height, the horizontal datum at the second level for retail, stepping the bigger building back. In the upper left, you can see how the buildings begin to terrace up to the tallest office buildings on the adjacent street to us. And on the lower right, you can see that there was a lot of effort made in saying, this isn't a private paseo, this is everyone's welcome here. So in the mid-block, we took the back of the restaurants and we talked them into turning them around and putting tables and opening the restaurants out to that paseo. We put our amenities for our residents on that area and created a mid-block market square that I think is going to add to that whole district. We take that same idea and we look a little bit at a collection of buildings. This is an example of what I call fostering connection. This is an intergenerational community. It's a 12-acre community that has housing, market rate housing, housing for the elderly, affordable housing. It has culture, it has education, it has recreation, it has wellness, and it's all mixed use over a 12-acre podium site. The site, because of the soils, required the podium and all the activity to be 12 feet up in the air over a parking garage. So in the same way, we tried to make a sense of welcoming. You can see the light in the trees where you're going as you go up the stairs. As you come up, you go into the largest of 7 courtyards. This community is organized around 7 different courtyards, each that has different circulation routes, so that you can find your way, not just in one direction, but you can meander through all of these spaces. And within the community, there are special areas for each of the stakeholders. There's places for preschool, there's places for the elderly, but there are also a variety of places where people are able to connect together in different ways. So there are places where you can go and have it be among people of similar thought, or you can go and mix with other people. And we've tried to do that in a variety of different ways throughout the campus. The last thing that's quite interesting about this development is the sense of connectivity. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see there's a group of people in the parade, walking and being the most active. To the left, you can see people in the shade sitting and observing and being part of that. And if you look on the right, you can see that there are older people in their residence or in their communal space that are able to look and participate. And it's a two-way street. People inside can see what's happening outside. The outside is seeing what's happening inside. It's about connecting people in different ways. And the last project I'll show you is a new community that kind of combines many of these ideas that I've just been talking about. In South San Francisco, it's about 1.5 million square feet of biotech space and about 1.5 million square feet of housing and retail. And the ferry arrives on the right, where you can see the white circle. There is a hotel site and a retail complex right at the base of the ferry being proposed. And as the blue circle continues, the red is the biotech, and the green to the upper left is the housing. And our thought was, how do we make this new private development in the public park, in the ferry, in the retail and hotels all work together? So you can see on the bottom right, we've realigned the road. As you approach this new district, you see the water, and it begins to set up a sense of expectation. And what we've done is when you arrive at a park that's along the water and the marina and a beach, places for the public. And as you move along towards the rear of the park, you see the residential building. And instead of having a solid wall to the building, we've opened the building up so it's like arms reaching out to welcome you. And at the base, to mediate between the public and the residential, we put a retail plaza. So residents could come down and have a cup of coffee, office workers could have a glass of wine or pick up their dry cleaning while they're waiting and they watch the ferry come. It's also was important to us to make a variety of spaces, a hierarchy of spaces. So there's a soccer field, there's a large active park, there's a boardwalk where all the water activities and people interested in that can begin to connect. And even on the bottom one is a small rooftop terrace for the residents to look out. So it has been my experience that if you combine all of these elements and you give something to the community and the new residents get something, there is tremendous opportunity in creating great spaces. So that's the end of, I think, our talks, and now we'll turn it back to Jeff for some questions and answers.
Great. Thank you, Rob, CJ, and John. Again, my name is Jeff Smith with Saris Regis, and on behalf of myself and our panelists, I wanted to again just say thank you to Andrew and the city for having us tonight. We are going to do some questions that have been prepared, and then we're going to have plenty of time to open it up. I know there's some questions out in our audience. So what I like to usually do is start off with kind of a softball question. And so remember this, Rob. Here's your softball. So about 20 years ago, I started with Saris Regis, and actually one of my first projects was with the Steinberg Group and Rob's group. Remember, Sarah Regis did your my first project with you, Rob. Rob, here's your question. Who's your favorite developer?
I'm going to go with Saris Regis. Door number 1. No.
Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure to work for Rob. Actually, Rob and I developed the Pierce, the first project in downtown San Jose, and it is one of my proudest projects as well, as I know it's very special to Rob. Okay, so next, actually, I'm going to ask John a question because it was mentioned in his bio, but I just got to ask, this is the coolest title I've ever heard of, Pilot in Command for NVIDIA. I mean, where did that come from, and are you certified to fly an airplane?
No, clearly I'm not. One of our founders is a pilot, and so when we assign a project and the person in charge, there's only one pilot in command of an aircraft, and that's what you get. When you're in charge of something, then you're the guy in charge. So
I think we all need to think about that and come up with some creative titles. That's great.
that's Chris Malachowski, by the way, gets full credit for that one.
Okay, great. And CJ, although this is the first time I've met you tonight, I understand you love to travel, and so I wanted to just ask, kind of, where's one of your favorite destinations in the world?
Yeah, one of the places I would say is Scandinavia, and I lived for a semester in Helsinki and spent a lot of time in Finland and really loved the walkability and the access to nature and, the access to fresh food there. So I would say that was one of my favorite places to travel and to go back to.
Great.
Great softball question. Yeah,
And
over Alto.
now that we're warmed up, all right, so my first question is actually going to be to CJ and Rob. So how can new housing development play a role in the city's placemaking goals? For example, how can housing help to create places within the city that have unique identity, support public interactions and activities among local residents, and create attractive neighborhoods? CJ?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought with that is housing is such a central part of doing that. When we think of the neighborhoods where we enjoy spending time, we enjoy living, housing is one of the most crucial parts of that. And I think Santa Clara has this huge opportunity because the city has some seeds of very walkable neighborhoods. It has a growing transit infrastructure. It's kind of on the verge of these kind of walkable kinds of neighborhoods. And I really liked what Rob said in terms of projects that contribute both to the existing residents and to the future residents, and thinking about how we could create, those types of places in Santa Clara.
Okay, well, I would just add that, follow up on that, because successful projects in great places come about when there are a win-win, not when somebody wins and somebody loses. And if people approach this process with the government, with the community, the existing community, with the proponents of a project, and they all share a common goal, I think that that's a very healthy step. And from the city's perspective, I think being clear about what your expectations are from the beginning is very valuable to everybody. When we start projects, we like to establish, here's our measuring stick. Like I showed you tonight, 7 ideas. Maybe some of those work for you, maybe you have other ones that are much better. But if everybody agrees, here's our measuring stick, and when we get ideas, we all have agreed upon ways to measure the success of it. We found that to be very effective.
Thanks, Rob. I've actually got somewhat of a follow-up question for you, Rob. You talk a lot about success, and in your experience, maybe what are some of the key ingredients? I think you spoke to a few of them, but really thinking maybe forward. Are there land use or maybe design elements, maybe even stuff you're seeing overseas? I know you do a lot of work overseas in some progressive areas. That are important to maybe consider or address in new housing as we kind of look to the next generation of housing?
We do, one of my offices in China and Shanghai, and we do a lot of work in Asia. And I think the values of human nature are the same wherever you are. And I tried to share with you, a number of ideas about how do you connect people A lot of times we talk about in our office, it's not the building. It's not how pretty the building is or how tall the building is or what color the building. It's the space between the buildings. That's where people make their connections. I'm a great believer in the journey is as important as the destination. And so how you set up these collection of buildings and the spaces between them are where I think the magic opportunities are.
It's great. Sure.
You know, one thing that I think is also useful to remember is, you know, all of us have different preferences. I was actually just reading rereading the pattern language recently, and it referenced this 1967 Santa Clara County study that was done. It was a survey of 3,000 residents, and it was basically asking what kinds of neighborhoods do people want to live in. I guess we still haven't figured it out in this last 40 years. But the conclusion was there was a mix of people. Some people wanted to live in the action. Some people wanted to live right near the action. And then some people preferred to live in a quieter spot farther away. And I think those same principles really apply to placemaking too. We can think about these types of walkable neighborhoods. Maybe they're not everybody's cup of tea, but there are enough people here who are really demanding these neighborhoods and not able to find them necessarily in our area, that they're, I think, a huge opportunity. So, you know, I always have to remind myself, you know, everyone else's preferences aren't the same as my own, you know. But, you know, just like in planning, we try to think about, you know, how can we incorporate kind of these different market segments into something that kind of comes together as a whole, whether it's you're living right in the action or you're living a little bit farther away or you're living in a quiet spot far, far away from it.
Great. So my next question's for John. So putting affordability aside and also maybe transportation, the commute for right now, let's just think about housing. How does Santa Clara's workforce and NVIDIA, in your case, how do they want to see, what do they want to see in their new housing? Are there amenities that you're seeing in new housing that are resounding with this workforce of yours? And maybe kind of a follow-up, and you can tie it into maybe some of the amenities you're putting in your new workplace, because I think there are some commonalities.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, what we're seeing with the newer workforce is the amenities they're looking for. I mean, they want, they're looking for the full community experience, and it's not just at home. I mean, they don't. They want to be able the walkability to find the nightlife, the the groceries, the pool, the community, those kinds of things. All those amenities that you find in these full service communities that are being built around, those things they want because that's their community that they connect with, and the ease to get the things to live life, but also at work. I mean, we provide so many typical amenities that, you know, in the past you'd have to go and leave and go to see, you know, go to the dry cleaner, go to the doctor, go to the dentist. We start to bring that in because life, one of these people, they commute via alternative means, and then to go do something like that on the way home is more difficult. So they're looking for kind of this ease of life to where I can make it, if I can't walk to it, it's problematic, right? They want to have, I guess, more of a European style of life where you walk to work, you walk to the grocery, you walk to your doctor, you walk to all the things you do to live life, but that's where your community is. That's where you connect with your people and your friends and your social life. So it doesn't have to be in the same building. I think we see it more in each of the new developments because it may not be available in the neighborhoods per se. So we're kind of creating these neighborhoods now in the developments. But if like CJ was saying, if you had that middle neighborhood where you had it in the community where it was walkable and accessible, then it doesn't have to be necessarily in each individual development. But I think what they're trying to find is more of that connected community where it's not just drive and get out and go and drive. It's a connection where you can walk to it and you can experience it and you can connect to the community at large. And that's what we're putting in our buildings, in our campuses, because that's kind of where they live their life, and that's kind of where their life has to happen. So we provide, and then that's what the expectation is. So
I think Rob's got a follow-up.
would say that one of the trends that we see as architects that do a broad array of housing is that the millennials are more comfortable with smaller individual spaces and more shared and common spaces and activities to connect with other people. And it's that connection that I think really is the key. We're all on our digital this and that so much of the time. To provide opportunity to connect in unprogrammed, easy ways as you go about your daily life is something that we're seeing more and more interest in.
Just again, a quick follow-up, just in the work environment, we used to all sit at a desk in a private office. That was our work environment. We've taken that away, and the workstation has gotten smaller, but the communal spaces have gotten much larger because that's where people connect, and that's what they want. They want the ability to go to a break area that's a more communal, and they'll spend more time there with their friends because that's the nature of the millennial generation. That's the nature of the new worker, is they connect more with people that way. And so I think it relates to where they live too.
That's great. So now I am going to ask John a follow-up question to part of your presentation. And really, when you talk about housing, transportation always follows.
Yeah.
And it's so key to the discussion. Really, what I want to ask is, where do you see the ideal commute for the new workforce at NVIDIA?
Ideal commute for us would be biking distance. I think if we could boil it down that simple, walking or biking distance would be ideal. I don't know if that's, I think that's a dream, but because we have such a diverse population, we span every generation that's in the workforce today at NVIDIA. So we have those that, like TJ said, that want to be in the action, near the action, and want to be away from the action. And so we will always have those that want to live out in Gilroy and Tracy, and those that want to have the land and be in their peace, and they'll have to drive, or we have to figure a way to get them here alternatively. So we'll always deal with that. But I think what we want to do is be more thoughtful about, I think as we start to look at developing communities, I think we have to be mindful of the infrastructure that's there, or the planned infrastructure. And I'm happy to see that the infrastructure is expanding. I think the new Measure B is a huge help on the peninsula and in the Bay Area about getting more public transportation that we can help leverage off of and get more people out of cars. I think that's, again, as an older population, tend to be more comfortable as single drivers, and we're educating to get out of that. And as our population gets younger, it's easier because they don't like it as much. So, but to your point, I think the closer and less time spent commuting, everyone wins. Yeah.
Great. I've got two questions related. I'm going to open up for all the panelists, and then again we'll open it up to the public. So maybe starting with Rob. Let's go here.
Another softball?
No. So, Rob, what can the city of Santa Clara do in terms of city policy to support the use of housing and placemaking specifically?
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think the best thing from my vantage point, and I'm not a policy person, I'm a placemaking person, is to define what your expectations and what you want to achieve. And many communities like San Francisco in Mission Bay, which has been wildly successful beyond the city's belief, was that they prescribed in detail what every building needs to look like, and that every 10 feet this has to happen, or every X number of feet something else has to happen. I think over-prescribing in trying to dictate an answer is very, very counterproductive. What I think the city could do is to think about what are the results. Go and find great places. Find places that you think are successful and try to identify the characteristics of them, much the way I tried to share with you. Because I think if your community agrees, these are our values, and they may be different from something on one side of 101 to the other side, or different on El Camino. But if you can, as a group, agree on what are the characteristics that are going to make the kind of community that we in Santa Clara want, that would be my best advice to you. It's a soft, not a hard answer.
I don't really have a hard answer either, except for to say that I think it's important to start in one or two or three places, to really start thinking about where are the places that could exemplify the type of community where you'd want to create these types of places, and then do it really well. Do it in a way that, like I was saying before, starts at the planning process. Maybe it's through a specific plan or a specific plan update, but do it in a way that both, brings people who maybe have lived there for a long time, brings people who are newcomers, brings prospective residents, brings business owners and institutions along, but do it really well and make that kind of your model for how to go forward. So it's starting small and kind of working from there. And I think there's this tension between wanting to prescribe everything and then not really prescribing anything, and finding kind of that balance where you create enough certainty for both a developer who's coming in, for an architect, and also for the existing residents, some of whom may have lived for a long time. So it's kind of finding that balance in terms of this, and the specific plan, I think, is a good tool to do that, in that you've got this hybrid of planning and zoning. You can dictate certain elements of land uses and intensities and characteristics, but you can also have it backed up by this plan and vision. So I think using the specific plan process and updating it so that you create kind of that right balance of certainty and predictability. Because I think once things become unpredictable, that's where sometimes planning processes and development processes really go awry. So I would say just start at a few places, do a really good specific plan that the community is along with for the whole time, and work to implement that well.
I'm not going to talk about residential policy. I'll stay in my lane.
Well, in interest of time, I think that ends this session. I think we'd love to open it up to the public. I think Andrew will help us do that, and we hopefully get some great Q&A here.
So, all right, well, I'll bring the mic around, and since we are broadcasting, I ask that you speak into it. And I think, Howard, you were asking a question when I rudely cut you off, so.
You were certainly in line to do that, thank you. Howard Myers, longtime resident of Santa Clara. I have a question for John. First of all, they said you were a retired Marine.
Yeah, retired Marine.
Thank you for your service. Many of us we recognize that Santa Clara is going to have to grow. And many of us are just trying to keep that growth from destroying our neighborhoods, and that's been happening. But what I don't understand is the corporations, I know it's been looked at because it's not that uncommon, but why is it that the companies around here like yourself or Apple or other companies, why is it you don't look at providing housing for your employees? I know there's a lot of details around it, but it's doable. Why don't you look at it?
I won't say we haven't looked at it. We haven't done anything on it yet, but not everybody lives here. So we don't prescribe where our employees live or work. So it's still one of those things that it's difficult. We're still trying to manage how we work. So we're not in the housing business. We're in the chip making business. So that is our business. And so we are a publicly traded company. We have obligations, obviously, to what we do and what we answer to our board and our shareholders. So when we start to get outside of what your specialties is, what you're really designed for as a company, you have to be careful on how far diverse you get. But we are looking at how we do that, especially to the attracting talent here. This is a very expensive place to live, and it doesn't mean we haven't looked at it. And many of the tech companies and the large companies are starting to address that, and it doesn't mean we won't either. I think you're starting to see that happening, because to attract talent, especially out of town talent, to come to live in the Bay Area, it's very difficult because it is a very expensive place to live. And again, it's not, we're leveraging the guys that know how to build residential. And so how we can partner with them or how we can work with the city to help figure out what the right way to do it is. We aren't just dumping it on, I mean, we pay exorbitant amount of fees and infrastructure fees to help build this. We want to work the right way to go. I mean, we are residents here. I mean, we do contribute. And it's, we want to see it done right as well. And so we are concerned about it. We just don't want to get into a business we're not experts in. We want to rely on those that are. So it's not as simple as just, we'll just go build, because we'll be the same as the things you don't like being built today. We'd be the guys trying to design something and build something that may or may not be the right thing either. And that's not really our expertise. So it's a delicate balance on how we want to do it. And so we have looked at it and we will continue to.
Okay, my question is for CJ. I'm on the Santa Clara Planning Commission, and the city is in the process of drafting the ADU accessory dwelling unit ordinance to conform to the new state law that went into effect in January. Once that ordinance passes, it's going to be much easier for the residents to build ADUs. So I have a couple questions. In some of the cities, like Vancouver, where I heard that 1/3 of the homes have ADUs, what have they done to foster that building? And what can Santa Clara do to help homeowners take up on that new ordinance? And how has the new, like if there's a large number of ADUs, has that changed the nature of, what the city looks like, how people live, and what the neighborhood looks like? And thirdly, do you know of any turnkey vendors who are looking to service that new needs, construction needs, like the bath fitter type of business model?
Those are great questions. I'll try to remember all of them. I think a few things just about accessory dwelling units is the cities that have had the most ADU development have also created resources, things like handbooks, instructional guides for homeowners, because I think the reality is the average homeowner isn't a developer, and building an ADU is a small scale development. And so, I can't think of any specific names of turnkey providers off the top of my head, but I think I have something that I can send your way. But the cities have also looked at things like helping homeowners with financing who want to, and the average ADU is something in the $100,000, $150,000 sometimes to build range, and looking at how cities can help either matchmake or create some kinds of incentive programs to help homeowners who are interested in building those. Something that Vancouver has done and Portland is considering is they actually allow 2 ADUs on each property. They allow 1 ADU that's detached and 1 ADU that's attached. So you could have a basement ADU and a small cottage, or a garage ADU and a internal ADU, something like that. And to get at your question of character, even at the scale that these are being built, they're finding that people who live there tend to have few or no cars. They're built in the areas that support walkable amenities. Portland, it's something like, I think 2% of single-family housing in the city has an ADU. And so I don't think there have been drastic changes in the neighborhood character. It's been truly kind of this invisible density in most places. So yeah, my advice is, in addition to implementing these ordinances, thinking about how you can make it easy and really just user-friendly for this first-time homeowner developer who's interested in building something for a family member or a student or something. So, thanks. And I'll send you some more resources after. Sure.
Just a quick question to John. Is there any way residents of Santa Clara can see the new building that's going to be completed soon?
Yeah, I will say yes, but I need to check with our PR guys. We are going to do an open house. We are still a little ways. We're getting close. We're still a little ways from finishing, but we can work something out that we'd love to welcome the community in. And we are very proud of what we've done, and it's a really nice new home for us. So we've had Andrew out with some of the city staff to view it in its construction state, but we are. When we're complete, I think we're working on something, so I'll make sure we get something out, but, yeah.
Can I just say, I just wanted to come back to your question, what can the city do? And come back to Jeff's question about city policy. Over time, working with developers, and also I think just human nature, I think that incentives, the carrot, is a real motivator. And I think human nature is, if there's an opportunity to get a good a benefit, I think that human nature responds to that very positively. And it certainly has been true, my experience with developers, when they are offered an opportunity to get more, to do something different by doing something, that's very intriguing. And I think that that's probably true with individual homeowners and just basic human nature.
Hi, in the beginning of the presentation, CJ mentioned that we needed more homes in the middle, condos, townhouses, single families, duplexes. But everything I see is high-density housing. And it seems like everything that comes to the city is stacked, packed, high-density housing. How does this come together? John's talking about, well, we really would want to be in San Francisco, but we can't afford it, so we're trying to do a little conversion here. And so, where it comes, when you meet suburbia.
I don't want to be in San Francisco. I have to be right where we are.
San Francisco here.
How does this converge when we have, we really need the smaller units, but everybody with the money that wants to build the most density because it's the most return, and it's great for us, but really, the more people you stack per square foot. So we don't seem to get the middle projects. We get these big giant ones. So how does that all flush out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the key things are a lot of the areas where these could go would be areas that are seemingly off limits to development today, like, single family neighborhoods where maybe a duplex gets introduced on the corner and the rest of the block is single family, or you have a garden courtyard condo building near, some single family housing today. Today it's zoned for single family, and it's not permitted to do that. And I think some of the provisions of zoning codes really make it difficult. Like, you have a small site, you want to do infill, but you have a high amount of parking that you have to provide, makes the configuration really difficult. So thinking about how some of the unintended consequences of our existing system kind of makes it this single family or the high density model. If you're really having to try to steer away from existing neighborhoods, it's probably going to be more worth your while to build high density. But if you can start to get a bit ingrained into existing neighborhoods, I think that's where that kind of gentler density can fit in. And that's, it's tough. Cities, I think Portland and Seattle are doing a lot to try to grapple with how do you evolve single family neighborhoods in a gentle way, and how do you do infill development in a way that is sensitive to the context that they're in, but also allows more families, more people to live there. So yeah, it's a great question.
We also have a problem attracting commercial. Getting. It seems like we can build all the apartments, but we can't attract grocery stores and restaurants and things like that. We can go to a Panera or whatever, but an actual restaurant, you sit down with a waiter. There's just not a lot of that going around. So how do we attract that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a few things. I think you need the critical mass of people within a pretty, manageable area to get there. But you also need to have the urban public realm, the public spaces, the streetscapes, the sidewalks, the community amenities that make people want to come there. So I think it's kind of, part of the issue is there aren't enough people and there isn't a public realm, in certain places to support it. I would say those are kind of my key parts, and it also takes time. So, I think the key part is having a vision for that in the long term, creating kind of what you're describing and working backwards and figuring out how do we get there. And what's the housing mix? What's the kind of demographic mix that's going to help, make that viable? But yeah, it's a good question.
I would just add one thing to that. I grew up here in Los Altos, and life has changed quite a bit. The zoning and the way our land use was developed in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s was really segregated by function. And I think what we're seeing in an interest in attracting the retail is knitting it together with housing so that the cities and the communities become a 24-hour-a-day activity rather than these isolated kind of silos that really is the tradition of the peninsula. And it's a very interesting time. We're seeing huge immigration from other countries where people are used to living much more compact and in high-rise buildings. We're wrestling with the transportation that we haven't, the public transportation that we really haven't kept up with as well as we need to be. If we're going to continue to be financially successful here and be able to supply all these jobs, we've got to start thinking about how we connect them through their transportation systems.
Yeah, I had a question for Rob. Looking at some of your projects, I'll give you high marks on some of them, but that one in the Art District concerns me. First, I'd like to get a quick definition of infill for what you consider as infill, and then if looking at that Art District project and look at it's right next to a neighborhood of single-family homes, and as an architect, do you have any idea what you did to the parking in that area and what's actually happening now that you're gone? What's happening to the neighborhood?
I do because my office was there for 30 years. That neighborhood are all good friends of mine. They are. I am one of the owners in that building, and I see them regularly, and they are pleased as punch. They have asked us for years. We had older one-story warehouse buildings, brick buildings, buildings that serve the old automobile industry, and times had changed, and they wanted more people to move into that area, to have life on the street. We're trying to put in a restaurant on the corner. They would be beyond their wildest dreams if they could walk to a coffee shop at the end of the block. So, when I talked a little bit about successful projects have to make everybody has to win. If you went and talked to that community, they would say they were the winner. So, and when I showed you these different projects, I did try to qualify. The design style may not be your style, but the same principles apply irrespective of style.
I live in downtown San Jose, and I didn't know Rob and Jeff built the piers before I met them here a couple days ago, but yeah, I can tell you that part of downtown is great art, but they needed more life at night, and I can tell you that is a great project, and it really has brought what that area of the downtown really needed, and it to the community that it's attached to, I think it's a great compliment, but really to the downtown on that main street of Almaden and First, it is absolutely that it's going to bring life to the art district that has been struggling because they don't have the residential, and especially the young, hipper residential connection to it. It's a win-win for that neighborhood for sure, and it's really what it needed down there.
Hi, I'm Jean Bedord, and I'm from Cupertino. I did get my MBA at Santa Clara. However, I want to talk about the other elephant in the room, which is our aging population. Silicon Valley is getting older, and people are not moving out. We have a problem in our city where people really like living in Cupertino, but they no longer have kids. So our school population is declining. We don't have any place that people, aging boomers can downsize. At any one time, there's something like 20 homes on the market in the entire city. What can we do to facilitate these changes that are coming in our population?
About that. A lot of gray up here, too. Not his.
Yeah, I have a few gray hairs. I think that's the big question. I think that's a huge motivator for creating variety in housing types. I totally recognize that there's a segment of baby boomers who want to age in place for as long as possible. Some of the motivations for accessory dwelling unit policy changes have been to either help bring a caretaker or family member onto the site, but there's also kind of this niche of urban condos or townhouses, the kind of things that would be, walkable to places easily if you're unable to drive, easily able to jump on a train or jump on the bus. But the idea being that it's kind of this missing middle, this kind of middle amount of density in a place that people want to be, regardless of their level of mobility and age and what their goals are. I think there's going to be a growing market segment of that.
We do a lot of design for the elderly, and it is a market sector that has, to a large degree, been skipped over for a period of time. The most common model was a model where you would buy in to a unit and then pay a monthly fee. During the 2008-2009 recession, developers that were doing that model found that the elderly couldn't sell their home, and they couldn't sell the home, they couldn't buy the new home, and it was a disaster. And it put huge brakes on the development of senior housing. And we're starting to see that sort of come out of that, but people are looking for new models to provide housing for the elderly. And the project that I showed you, the Campus for Jewish Life in Palo Alto, is a very interesting prototype in that it has preschool, and we designed it so that the elderly could go and help with the preschool. And it's got after school, and the after school kids come and help the elderly with their computers and their software. And they have aggregated their recreation facilities, and so their theaters or their gyms are available to people of different ages during the course of the day. And the people, particularly the older people that live there, it's given them a new lease on life, because as you get older, you tend to get more isolated. And this is an opportunity to be totally integrated in an intergenerational community. So when the city looks at policy and specific plans, maybe there's an opportunity to build that in to your new development. I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Hi, I'm Martin Bell, Santa Clara residents, and the Pierce project, it really seems like a success. So I'm going to ask for the secret sauce. How many parking spaces are there per unit, and do the residents have parking permits for the street?
I'm going to let Jeff answer part of that, but I'm going to tell you, I had an epiphany the other night. We designed the garage, I don't know, it has, I think, a car and a half, one parking place per bedroom, 1.5. But we designed that garage to be a very efficient garage, and we didn't think about how that garage might be readapted at some point in the future for another use. When we have driverless cars and you don't need all this parking. And I thought to myself, if there's one mistake that we probably made on that project, it was to not think about the design of that parking garage and be able to adapt that garage to more housing or other uses in the future. I don't know, you can help me with the details.
So I'm just going to speak a little bit on driverless cars. That's one thing we do, and working diligently on. The autonomous driving is something NVIDIA is very deeply in, so we're working on that so you can then adapt your parking garages.
That's great. Well, just to follow up on the parking, so we are parked at about 1.5 to unit, per unit. Now, the interesting thing about downtown is they required us to have 80 motorcycle spaces, which was more than we'd ever put in a project, and it was somewhat forward-thinking that that would be attractive to the residents there. We haven't seen that yet, but what I will tell you is the Pierce is probably the 8th project out the door that we've worked on in this cycle, and the range of parking goes from probably 1.2 up all the way to 2 spaces per unit. And we have recently gone back and done counts on how much parking is actually being used in these projects. And in every one of them, it's substantially lower than what we have provided and what we projected. I think our average is more closer to 1 or 1.1. Now, I mean, every city, every place is different, but we're developing in places like the new downtown in Redwood City, where it's closer to 1 or even maybe below that because we're so close to transit. We built a huge garage in Foster City, which may be more akin to Santa Clara, and they required us to put 2 spaces per unit in the garage, and we have not even filled up half the garage. So there's millions of dollars that were, so to speak, wasted. And again, the autonomous car is another factor. But what I would say is, just to kind of wrap up a question, what was the secret to success at the Pierce? And I will say that, Rob, having his office there for 30 years, was so helpful because, like he said, he knew everybody in the neighborhood, and he really took us under his wing, and we went to so many neighborhood meetings in congregation as well as one-on-one with that neighborhood, and we basically heard them and agreed to do some great things, and then we followed through with it with a really special development that really ties into the art district there, and I'm again proud of it, and I would have you go walk the streets and ask people, because I think people really do enjoy it.
Thanks for your presentations. Just was National Bike Day, I think, on the 11th. A lot of us here are married to our cars, and we can't really conceive of people walking everywhere and riding their bikes everywhere. How do we transition, and how do we move to be a more walkable community and bikeable community? I present to anybody who has best answer.
A couple of things that are some of the lower hanging fruit are, making sure the streets are safe and comfortable for people to walk and bike. So, I think from what I've seen, Santa Clara has great sidewalks, but some of the bike infrastructure, you may be less comfortable riding in. So thinking about how, we can retrofit our streets to be comfortable for, people riding with their kids, for people who are less experienced, for bike riding. But I think you can also think about, we've talked a lot about transit. We can think about some of these other policies that can make or break transit, like, how do we decide how much space is devoted to buildings and uses versus parking? How do we decide how much we're going to emphasize people driving to a spot versus people getting there other ways? And so I think you hit the nail on the head. It's going to be a transition. There are going to be some kind of awkward growing pains, but I think some of the key parts are focusing on the infrastructure that we can do, and then thinking about parking policy reforms that de-emphasize the car in every building, and thinking about ways you could share those resources, especially as we have a lot of uncertainty about future parking demand. Do we want to be building for the parking demand of 1960, or do we want to be building for the parking demand of the future? So I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, I think to CJ's point, I think the biking, we have a pretty robust biking community, and I think the greatest complaint is a safe biking environment. And I think some cities have started to take that on to create safer biking lanes, and I think the city has some of that, but I think as more and more can be established, safer biking lanes, I think that is really a good way to encourage that community to continue and to grow it. I think not only to support it, to get people around, to get people off the transit and not have to figure out how to get off the transit corridors and then into someplace else to getting the biking, but just biking to and from and getting people out of their cars. I just think the car, everyone's starting to acknowledge it in every generation that this driving that vehicle around everywhere you go is just not the best way to get around. And I think creating a safer environment, and most of the streets have the lane width. It's just creating a bike lane that you feel safe enough to be in. And I think that's, even in the downtowns now, they're starting to create those spaces. And I think just to further encourage that, I think is the way to go.
I'll just say one other thing, and that is, if you look at the land that the developers are most interested in, it's around public transportation. And if you look at where people want to live, they want to live around transportation. So if you had full power to do anything you want in the city, I would look at those locations where there is public transportation infrastructure and maybe start with those. And as CJ or somebody said earlier, make sure when you do it, you do the first one or two, you really put the effort in and you do it right. You do it right. And if you do, it will build its own momentum.
Well, we've reached the end of our scheduled time, so I think in everyone's interest of respecting everyone's time, we'll close up. I'd like to thank again our panelists and moderator. And I'd like to say that I feel, and I think on everyone's behalf, really privileged to have had you all here tonight to share from your experience. I think we've learned a lot, and it's been very helpful for us as a community. I would like to mention a couple announcements quickly. We did have an event scheduled for next week on Thursday night as well. Unfortunately, we were going to have to postpone that. That was Professor Chris Collette from Berkeley was going to speak on urbanizing Silicon Valley, and he's had some family issue that he has to address, and so we'll have to postpone that event, but we will look for an opportunity to bring him back here as well. And our next event is scheduled for June 10th. That's a Saturday, and we're going to have a whole community-wide visioning workshop. We'll have lunch and as a community, and then work on coming up with identifying within our community where we think there could be great places, where there are great places, where there are places that aren't so great, and what we can do about it. And that will be led by Project for Public Spaces out of New York, coming out to lead us through that exercise. So I encourage everyone to come to that as well. And please help yourself to some cookies, coffee for the road. Thank you all.